The wind tore at the town of Bitter Hollow like a wild thing, dragging dust across the cracked wooden porches and howling through the empty streets. Buildings sagged under the weight of too many hard years. Window shutters clattered loose, and the air itself smelled of dry earth, sweat, and something sour of fear. There was no sheriff worth his badge, no judge to hear grievances, and certainly no one willing to stand against the Black Hollow riders. They owned Bitter Hollow now, and everyone in it. Eliza Monroe watched from the broken frame of her shop as the last of her life's work curled up into smoke. Her fingers, raw from years of stitching, clutched a blackened scrap of cloth, useless now, just like her. She had sewn dresses for the fine ladies once, stitched sturdy shirts for the ranch hands, even mended boots when times got desperate. It hadn't saved her. It hadn't saved anyone. The gang hadn't even spared a word for her when they set the blaze. Just laughter and the stomping of hooves as they thundered past. Men like Caleb Voss, their leader, didn't see her as anything more than a speck underfoot. Eliza stood there long after the last embers died, the townfolk drifting away like ghosts who dared not look too long, lest they be next. Matthew Kane watched her too, from the porch of the old saloon, a place long shuttered and abandoned. He was a worn figure, broad-shouldered but gaunt from grief, his once keen eyes dulled by loss. His hat sat low over his brow, casting his face in shadow, and his calloused hand rested absently on the worn grip of a revolver he hadn't drawn in years. Matthew had once ridden with the best of them, scouts, lawmen, soldiers, but when his wife and 2 daughters were caught in a raid 3 summers back, he laid his guns to rest and turned his back on the world. Eliza did not cry. She was not made of the soft stuff anymore. The fire had burned it out of her, same as it had burned the walls that once sheltered her. She turned away from the ashes with a stiff back and a face carved from stone, walking toward the heart of the town where the sheriff's office loomed. The building looked sturdy enough on the outside, but inside it was rotted with cowardice. Sheriff Dunn barely glanced up when she entered. He was a man of thick jowls and thinning hair, his badge tarnished and loose on his vest. His boots were kicked up on his desk, a jug of whiskey sweating beside him. "I want justice," Eliza said, her voice clear and sharp as a knife's edge. Dunn grunted without looking at her. "You want a miracle, lady. Go pray for one. My home, my livelihood. We're yours to lose." Dunn cut in, finally lifting his gaze. His eyes were dull, like wet clay. "Ain't nobody in this town gonna cross Caleb Voss. Not for a burned-up seamstress. You think your sob story's gonna change that?" Eliza felt the weight of the room pressing in, the hopelessness thick and choking. For a heartbeat, she imagined drawing the pistol from Dunn's own holster and laying him out on the floor. But what good would it do? Another coward would take his place by sundown. "You'll do nothing then," she said, not asking, just confirming what everyone already knew. "Best you start thinking about getting out of Bitter Hollow," Dunn muttered, "before you lose more than your thread and needles." She left without another word, stepping back into the brutal heat of the afternoon. People watched her from the shadows, their faces pale, their bodies pressed into doorways and behind curtains. No one dared meet her gaze. Matthew Kane was still there, a statue carved in grief and leather, a cigarette burning down between his fingers. As she passed him, their eyes locked for a flicker of a moment. In his, she saw recognition, not of her face, but of her anger, of her refusal to crawl away like the rest. Night fell heavy and fast, cloaking the town in a smothering blackness. The only lights left burned at the Broken Horn Saloon, where the riders drank and caroused and howled like wolves. Eliza sat outside the ruin of her shop, the air cold against her skin despite the lingering heat of the day. She dug a shallow hole in the hard-packed earth with her bare hands, burying the blackened scrap of cloth like a funeral offering. No one was coming to save her. There was no white knight, no miracle waiting beyond the horizon. There was only her, the ruins of what had been her life, and a hollow rage too big for her thin body to contain. A horse snorted nearby, Matthew Kane's, tethered to the post outside the old saloon. She looked at him again, sitting silent in the dark, the ghost of a man who had nothing left to lose. Maybe that was what it took. Maybe the only ones who could fight monsters like Calebvas were those already half dead themselves. Eliza wiped the dirt from her hands and stood, her shadow stretching long and thin under the sliver of moonlight. She wasn't sure what came next, only that she would not sit idle and let the riders claim whatever pieces of her soul remained. She took one step into the darkness, then another, drawn not by hope but by the bitter certainty that if she did nothing, she would vanish from the world as if she had never been. And somewhere in the gloom, Matthew Kane rose from his seat as well, a quiet echo of a man ready, perhaps, to believe again. Together, though neither spoke, they moved toward the edge of town, where the night grew thick and dangerous, toward whatever waited in the desert beyond, toward something that might, for the first time in a long while, be worth fighting for. The sun hung low over the barren flats, staining the sky a bruised purple. Eliza trudged through the dead grasses, boots kicking up small clouds of dust, until she reached the place where the old town met the endless wilderness. She carried nothing but the clothes on her back, and a grim determination that hardened her step. Behind her, Bitter Hollow shrank into a forgotten speck. Matthew Kane was already waiting, crouched by a dying mesquite tree, his hat pulled low, one hand resting lazily near the rifle across his knees. He looked up as she approached, but said nothing. Words were thin currency between broken people. Instead, he nodded toward the fire he'd built, a small, reluctant thing, little more than a handful of twigs barely breathing smoke. Without asking, Eliza settled across from him, legs folding stiffly beneath her. Silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped at the rising stars. "You got anyone left?" Matthew asked finally, voice rasping like dry paper. No, she warmed her palms over the fire, feeling the sting where the smoke found raw blisters. "And you?" He gave a slow shake of his head. The gesture was enough. Pain like his didn't need explanation. For a long time, they said nothing more, the fire between them crackling low. Finally, Matthew stood, brushing the dust from his worn jeans. "You aim to stay breathing," he said. "You're going to need more than grit." He tossed a battered Colt toward her. It landed in the dirt at her feet, heavy as judgment. Eliza stared at the weapon for a moment before picking it up. Her fingers curled around the grip with an awkwardness that made Matthew's mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but close. He walked a few paces, set a line of old cans on a fallen log, then gestured for her to follow. The first shot jerked her arm back painfully, missing by a wide margin. She hissed in frustration, steadying her stance the way she'd once seen the ranch hands do. The second shot hit dirt a foot shy. The third clipped the edge of a can, sending it spinning. "Better," Matthew grunted, moving beside her. His hands, rough and scarred, guided her shoulders, her wrists. "You're fighting the gun. Let it do the work. Just tell it where to go." For an hour they practiced under the falling night, until her arms ached and her ears rang. When she finally sent a can flying with a clean shot, a fierce satisfaction bloomed in her chest, burning away some small part of the helplessness that had shackled her for so long. They camped there that night, sharing a meal of stale biscuits and salted jerky. The fire threw shifting shadows against their faces, and in the flickering light, Eliza glimpsed a different man than the silent stranger she had first met. A man who once carried hope like a sword. "You weren't always hiding out in Bitter Hollow," she said quietly. Matthew's gaze was fixed on the fire, but the past flickered across his face all the same. "Used to ride with the Army Scouts. Knew every canyon and dry riverbed from here to the Bighorn Mountains. Thought I could read the land like a book. Thought I could outthink the devils chasing us." He shook his head slowly. "Turns out, devils ride faster than horses." Eliza didn't press him for more. Some griefs were better left buried where they could do no more harm. In the days that followed, they worked side by side under the savage sun. Matthew taught her how to move without leaving tracks, how to listen for the small betrayals of sound in the brush, how to shoot not just to kill but to live. Eliza learned with a desperate hunger, each skill a brick in the wall she was rebuilding around her battered soul. She wasn't fast yet, but she was steady. She wasn't strong, but she was unbreakable. One evening, While the desert wind sang mournful songs through the scrub, Eliza set aside her rifle and turned to Matthew. "What are we fighting for?" she asked, voice low. Matthew didn't answer immediately. He pulled a knife from his belt, idly carving a line into the hard ground. "Some folks would say it's for revenge, some for pride. Me, I think it's about reminding those bastards they don't own everything they touch. Not the land, not the people." His eyes lifted to hers, full of something raw and shining. "Not us." Eliza nodded, feeling the truth of it settle in her bones. As the moon rose higher, throwing cold silver light across the camp, a rider appeared on the horizon. Matthew spotted him first, rising to his feet with the slow, sure movements of a man who knew death when it rode toward him. He handed Eliza the rifle without a word. The rider, a boy no older than 16, pulled up short when he saw the barrel pointed at his chest. His horse skittered nervously under him. He raised both hands high. "Message," the boy called out. "From Caleb Voss." Matthew motioned for Eliza to lower her gun, but only slightly. The boy, voice shaking, delivered the message. The Black Hollow riders would soon sweep through the last ranches outside Bitter Hollow, claiming the last scraps of land and life. Those who resisted would be shown no mercy. When the boy was gone, galloping back into the night, Eliza and Matthew stood facing each other in the brittle darkness. "They're coming," Eliza said. Matthew nodded, the lines of his face hardening like drying clay. "Then we meet them," she said. Her voice didn't waver. In Matthew's weathered gaze, she saw something awaken, something fierce and dangerous that had been sleeping for too long. He gave a small, grim nod. Together, they began to plan, the fire between them burning brighter against the gathering dark. The day broke sharp and brittle. The sky cracked open with a light so fierce it seemed to scour the world clean. Bitter Hollow woke slowly, the battered souls within it unaware that before nightfall, the earth would drink deep of blood. Eliza stood at the edge of town beside Matthew, her hand steady on the rifle, her heart drumming a fierce rhythm in her chest. Matthew had chosen the ground carefully. He knew where the riders would come, following the wagon road that sloped gently into the valley. There, the earth narrowed between two rises of stone and mesquite, creating a natural bottleneck. It was the only way into town without crossing the open flats. Suicide for any group expecting a fight. They had no army to stand with them. No deputies, no lawmen. Only a few ranch hands and shopkeepers Matthew had managed to stiffen with words of grim purpose. They weren't warriors, but they had fury enough to borrow steel for a day. Eliza shifted her weight, feeling the sunrough wood of the post at her back. Her new duster hung loose over her shoulders, a man's coat stitched hastily to fit her frame. She had carved her own place here now. No longer just a seamstress, no longer invisible. A horn sounded in the distance, a low, mocking wail. Dust rose on the horizon, thick as a storm cloud. Caleb Voss was coming. Matthew squinted into the glare. "You remember what I told you?" Eliza nodded once, sharp and sure. "Pick the leaders. Break their will first." Matthew's lips pressed into a thin line. "You shoot to end it, not to scare him." The dust boiled closer. Riders appeared, black figures against the sun, cruel shapes hunched over snarling horses. Caleb Voss led them, tall and broad, his coat trailing behind him like a banner of death. A cruel grin split his face as he rode ahead of his men, already savoring the kill. At Matthew's signal, the townsfolk melted into their hiding places. Eliza crouched low behind a boulder, her rifle brace steady, her breath shallow but controlled. Her hands did not shake. Not anymore. The riders thundered into the narrow pass, too tightly packed, their laughter ringing off the canyon walls. The first shot cracked like a whip. One of Voss's lieutenants pitched from his saddle, a dark blossom blooming on his chest. Before the others could react, another fell, then a third. The canyon echoed with gunfire, the smell of powder thick in the air. Chaos erupted. Horses screamed. Men shouted and wheeled their mounts, searching for an enemy they could not see. Matthew's people stayed hidden, disciplined, picking their shots with cold precision. Voss roared, dragging a sawed-off shotgun from his saddle. "Come out, you cowards! Come out and fight me!" Eliza sighted down her barrel, her finger tightening. She could end him now, one shot through that arrogant sneer. But Matthew's earlier words held her back. Cut off the head too early, and the body thrashes wild. Instead, she aimed for the men flanking him, the ones rallying to his barked commands. One by one, they fell or broke ranks, their formation unraveling like cheap cloth under a hard pull. Seeing his numbers thinning, Voss bellowed in rage and spurred his horse forward, charging straight into the heart of Bitter Hollow. Half a dozen men followed, desperate and wild-eyed. Matthew rose then, stepping into the open like a figure out of a half-remembered nightmare. His rifle barked once, twice, dropping 2 men in quick succession. The town's defenders burst from their cover, a ragged but determined line, cutting off any hope of retreat. Eliza broke from her perch, sprinting to the center of town. Her boots pounded the earth as she moved, rifle swinging up, eyes locked on Voss. She met him in the square, the ground scorched and churned by hooves. Voss dismounted in a rush, shotgun in hand. He grinned when he saw her, a woman, slight and dust-streaked, standing alone. His laughter rumbled deep and mean. "This what Bitter Hollow's come to," he sneered. "A dressmaker with a pop gun?" Eliza said nothing. Words wouldn't carry here. Only action. Voss raised the shotgun. She moved first. Her rifle cracked. The blast caught him high in the shoulder, spinning him around with a grunt of pain. He dropped the shotgun, clutching the wound, rage and disbelief twisting his face. With a roar, he charged her barehanded. Eliza didn't retreat. She sidestepped, swift and sure, and drove the butt of her rifle into his ribs. The blow staggered him, but didn't fell him. Voss swung a wild backhand, catching her across the temple and sending her sprawling. The world tilted. Stars burst behind her eyes. She forced herself up, blood trickling from her brow. Voss loomed over her, drawing a knife from his belt. "Should have stayed in the ashes, little bird," he hissed. Before he could strike, a shot rang out, loud, close, final. Voss jerked, a look of dumb surprise crossing his features. He staggered forward 2 steps and collapsed heavily into the dirt. Behind him, Matthew Kane lowered his revolver, smoke curling from the barrel. Eliza sat back hard, breathless and trembling, as the remnants of the Black Hollow riders either surrendered or fled into the desert. They were broken as surely as their leader. The town fell silent, broken only by the crackle of distant fires and the moans of the wounded. Matthew stepped to her side, offering his hand. She took it, gripping hard, letting him pull her to her feet. "You all right?" he asked, voice rough. "I will be," she said, voice steadier than she felt. Around them, Bitter Hollow's people emerged, hesitant, blinking at the bloody morning. No one cheered. No one danced in the streets. But they stood taller, shoulders squared, eyes brighter. The town had fought. The town had survived. Matthew clapped her lightly on the shoulder, a rare smile ghosting across his face. "You did good, Eliza Monroe." She looked at the bodies, at the smoking wreckage, at the thin line of survivors gathering around them, and felt something powerful stir in her chest. Not fear, not sorrow, purpose, and somewhere deep inside, the beginning of something even stronger, hope. By the time the sun slipped behind the western hills, Bitter Hollow had buried its dead. Graves marked with simple stones lined the edge of the town, each one a silent testament to a price paid in blood. The survivors worked without complaint, their movements slow but sure, the weight of what they had done settling heavy on their shoulders. Eliza stood apart, watching the shadows stretch long across the empty streets. The rifle still hung at her side, but her hands no longer gripped it with desperation. It had become an extension of her, as natural now as the calluses forming on her palms. Matthew found her there, just beyond the last grave. His face was lined deeper by the day's violence, but his eyes held a light she hadn't seen before. Respect, maybe even pride. "You thinking of leaving?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, her gaze steady on the rising stars. "No, not anymore." For the first time in a long while, the horizon didn't seem like a threat. It looked like a promise. The town gathered that night in the ruined saloon, the only place big enough to hold them all. Lanterns swung from the beams, casting pools of golden light over the battered tables and cracked floorboards. Men and women huddled together, nursing wounds and whiskey, speaking in low, reverent tones about the stand they had made. Matthew raised a glass in the flickering gloom. "We ain't soldiers," he said. "We ain't lawmen. We're just folks who remembered we had something worth fighting for." A murmur of agreement rolled through the room, rough and heartfelt. He turned his gaze to Eliza then, and the others followed. She stiffened under their attention, but she didn't flinch. "This town owes its life to a woman who refused to let it die," Matthew said. "A woman who reminded us we still had a spine when we were sure we'd lost it." Eliza felt her cheeks heat, but she lifted her chin. She hadn't fought for thanks. She had fought because it was the only way to live with herself. Still, when the people of Bitter Hollow raised their glasses to her, she raised hers back. Outside, the desert wind carried the scent of smoke and dust, and something newer, something cleaner. The next weeks passed in a flurry of rebuilding. Broken fences were mended. Crooked signs were straightened. A new schoolhouse took shape where the old church had once leaned, its walls built by rough hands that had learned the value of hope. No one spoke Caleb Voss's name anymore. The Black Hollow riders had vanished into the wastelands like ghosts, and no one mourned their passing. Eliza worked alongside the others, her place among them as natural as breathing. She stitched new saddlebags for the ranchers, patched shirts for the children, and cleaned rifles for those who would never again be caught defenseless. But she was no longer just a seamstress. When trouble stirred beyond the horizon, it was Eliza they turned to first. One evening, Matthew found her sitting on the saloon's porch, sharpening the edge of an old knife. "Word spreading," he said, leaning against the post beside her. "Other towns heard what happened here. Folks are talking." "Talking about what?" she asked, not looking up. "About a woman who stood her ground when no one else would. About a town that rose from the ashes." Eliza smiled thinly. "Let him talk." Matthew chuckled, a low sound like gravel sliding down a dry riverbed. "They will. And when the next storm comes, and it always does, they'll remember Bitter Hollow. They'll remember you." She slid the knife back into its sheath and stood, facing the gathering dusk. "I didn't do it for stories," she said. "No," he agreed. "You did it so there'd be someone left to tell them." They stood side by side as the stars kindled overhead, the land stretching out before them, endless and wild. Somewhere in that vast dark, other outlaws schemed, other towns trembled. But for now, Bitter Hollow stood unbowed. And so did Eliza Monroe. The legend would grow, of course. It always did. In time, they'd say she was faster than any man, that she could see in the dark, that no bullet could find her heart. They'd whisper her name in the same breath as outlaws and heroes, weaving her into the fabric of the frontier's hard, beautiful myth. Eliza would hear the stories, and she would smile that small, knowing smile, because she would remember the truth. She had been broken once, robbed of everything, left to drown in her own despair. And yet she had risen, not because she sought glory, not because she craved vengeance, but because when everything else was stripped away, she discovered that what remained was stronger than any weapon. It was herself. As the night deepened, Matthew tipped his hat and turned to leave, his boots scuffing softly against the dust. Eliza stayed a moment longer, letting the cool air wash over her, feeling the quiet power that pulsed in the bones of the earth. Then she stepped down off the porch and into the darkness, ready to meet whatever came next, a living legend born not of miracles, but of grit, of fire, and of a heart that refused to yield.